It is called The Invading Sea. Can South Florida be saved? For the first time, the editorial boards of the Palm Beach Post, the Miami Herald, and South Florida Sun-Sentinel joining together. Their focus, rising sea levels and human impact on that very thing. Joining me now to talk about this, two people from the Palm Beach Post editorial board, Rick Christie, editorial page editor, and Howard Goodman, editorial writer with the Post. Thank you so much for coming in. So many major problems in South Florida. You wanted to chiefly focus on this. We'll begin with you, Mr. Christie. Talk about what the focus of the editorial was for those who did not read about it, and we'll pick up from there.
Well, the focus is of the project itself, which is an editorial board project of the three newspapers, is to, one, raise awareness about sea level rise and the threat of it in South Florida, everywhere from the Keys all the way up to Jupiter. And after that, because it is an election year, to try to get it out in front of our politicians and actually motivate them on the state level to do something about it.
Mr. Goodman, encapsulate the focus specifically, some of the things you said in the editorial, and why you all think chiefly this is a topic that demands action now.
Yeah, well, first let me say that it's more than one editorial.
Right.
It's a campaign that all three newspapers are engaged in simultaneously.
This is the jump off for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And right, we had our launch about a week and a half ago. And I think we've had 5 editorials since then. And we're going to be running them pretty much twice a month all the way through November.
And reporting around them.
Yes.
Reporting, op-eds, contributions from scientists and politicians and business leaders, concerned citizens. And what the main thing that we're trying to get across, because we came to feel that even though we were writing about this individually, in order to get the attention that it deserves in a state where discussion of this has really been suppressed at the political level, it needed all of our voices. And what we're trying to say is that the science, we're seeing signs now of rising seas. We're seeing more flooding on sunny days. We're seeing weird things like an octopus that shows up in the storm drain at Miami Beach.
And disturbing things like saltwater intrusion into our wells.
Right, that's right.
Or flooding during the king tides.
And it's not just a coastal phenomenon. We're seeing that the water seeps under the ground in Florida, under the porous limestone that we all reside on, and is bubbling up even into the west.
In the kickoff to your work, you all talked about something. You said, we don't for a moment question the great hurricane scientists who came together for the big conference this week, our Steve Weigel, one of the ones on one of those panels, and yet we'll question science where 97% of scientists on an international panel say man has a role in climate change, and we need, if we want to ensure our future, our livelihoods, our coastline, to do something about it. Amplify those thoughts.
Well, the thought is, as you just said, you know, we trust scientists to tell us about where hurricanes are going, how strong they'll be, and the damage that they'll do. But for some reason, we keep questioning those scientists in terms of climate change, as you said, sea level rise and the effects of it and the threat of it. And it's kind of mind-boggling, to be honest with you. And so we want to really push this thing forward, because how do you deny something that when the water is lapping at your feet, you know, on a given day, how can you deny that the sea is rising in some way?
And yet some people this week who might have, like I did, read the Wall Street Journal, there was a huge editorial, not an editorial, but an op-ed piece from a scientist, he said, out of the University of Virginia, I believe, he basically threw water on climate change, and so people sitting at, or man-made involvement in it. So as you both smile, let's begin with you, Mr. Goodman. What do you say to somebody who says, what am I supposed to think or believe?
Well, what I would say is that the proponents of the fossil fuel industry and other interests that have a strong interest in keeping things as they are have done a very good job over the last 20 years of confusing the entire issue, of creating a division among the scientific community that doesn't really exist. As you said, 97% of climate scientists are agreed that man has a significant role to play in what's been happening. The heat of the oceans has been increasing at a growing rate.
Because it's the sink for a lot of this heat buildup. Talk about the Florida of...
I wanted to add something real quick to that. And I mean, in that, we had a couple of, we actually asked a couple of scientists to take a look at this op-ed when we got it, because we want to give everybody a fair say, and we're not scientists ourselves. So we asked a couple of scientists, you know, if they would take a look at this op-ed and say, look, are we going in the wrong direction here? Let's try to adjust things if we need to. They both took a look at it, and both came back saying this is ridiculous. And for example,
ridiculous in what sense?
In the sense that his premise, in like his first 3 paragraphs
of the Wall Street Journal,
of the op-ed. I'm sorry,
the Wall Street Journal, trying to throw
op-ed.
water on man-made involvement.
Yeah, basically, and that's the sea. And at some point, he was saying that the sea level isn't even rising, which is foolish in that everyone knows water expands when it gets hotter.
In our remaining time, sum up for people at the outset of this project, what's at stake, what Florida 2050 looks like, or Florida 2100 looks like if we don't start taking action. And against a backdrop where, as you all note in the onset of your editorials, you have a governor who a few years ago didn't even want climate change used as a term. For our audience, first, your thoughts on where we are 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now in this state.
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, there are, just as with a hurricane, there is a range of deciding where that intensity of the hurricane will be or what the path will be. There are estimates as to how high the sea is likely to rise, but a conservative, middle-of-the-road consensus now is that in 40 years, that sea level is going to be 2 feet higher.
And if we have a bad hurricane, as you pointed out, an Irma-sized hurricane, had it hit us as a Cat 5 full-on, you all pointed out much of Miami Beach's Art Deco buildings would be underwater.
All of it.
Right. It would have
all of it.
Right. It would have made Katrina look like a picnic.
So what is your call to action for the public? And why do we sometimes see such a disconnect where there's not a bigger call for action, which is part of the project to try and engender and focus that? But what is specifically going to be your call for action to the public and to politicians as you roll this out in the many months to come?
Well, the biggest disconnect really is that people don't see it, or they don't believe they see it. Yeah, it's too big, and they don't really see it. And that's one of the things we try, as you mentioned, we've tried to point out in the editorials. Here's an example of what's going on. And one of the biggest ones you mentioned was saltwater intrusion. Our drinking water supply is being threatened by this encroachment of salt water. And so what we want to do is we want the readers out there and the residents of South Florida in particular to understand that this is indeed a threat. Even if you are not seeing buildings falling into the ocean right now or something like that, that's not the issue. The issue is investing $1 now to save $4, you know, down the road in taxpayer money. Because if we don't invest now, we are going to end up spending more if we don't do something about our infrastructure and resiliency in terms of our buildings. So the call is to get our residents to be more aware and to put pressure on our politicians and get them to talk about this in this election year. Get politicians like candidate that you had on just earlier, Mr. Cummings, congressional candidate Mr. Cummings, asking him about sea level rise. What are you going to do about this?
Okay. One thing we should point out is that our local politicians at the county level and at the municipal level are hip to this.
Yes.
And they've been working together. The 4 counties from Monroe to Palm Beach have been working together on a compact to get better building codes, to petition. What we really need are the state officials and the federal officials.
And the business community.
And the business community to see. And what the ordinary citizen can do is to knock on doors and make phone calls and make sure that those people are aware that this is an important issue to them.
Gentlemen, as has so often been your history, the Palm Beach Post helping lead the way on a topic that many will argue is the single most important issue we'll face in the next 100 years. And this place, this peninsula we all call home. We thank you for bringing your voices and your focus to this. And
thank you.
We'll be hearing a great deal more about this. You owe it to yourself to start reading up about it.